Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on human and climate security threats in the Indo-Pacific, scope for India-US Maritime Partnership, jointly organized by the Center for Public Policy Research, CPPR Kochi, and the Pacific Forum in Hawaii, USA. I'm Anusri Suresh, Senior Associate in International Relations at CPPR. The Center for Public Policy Research is an independent public policy think tank dedicated in Kochi. Our engagement in public policy that began in 2004 has initiated open dialogue, policy changes, and institutional transformation in the area of international relations and security, livelihood, urban reform, governance, law, and related subjects. To know more about what we do, please visit our website, www.cppr.in. Our partner organization, Pacific Forum, founded in 1975, is a nonprofit foreign policy research institute based in Hawaii. The forum's programs encompass current and emerging political security, economic, and business issues in the Indo-Pacific region through analysis and dialogue. So in today's joint discussion, we will be delving into the key transnational human security as well as climate security threats in the wider Indo-Pacific region and the scope for India-US maritime cooperation. So we are delighted to have a distinguished panel of experts with us today. I warmly welcome the speakers for today's discussion, Professor Jeffrey Payne, Assistant Professor at the Near East South Asia at the Center for Strategic Studies in USA. He pilots the Center's maritime security programming, including its ongoing series devoted to the Indian Ocean region and wider Indo-Pacific. And Dr. Manish Torangpa is the Honorary Director of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Affairs, India. Formerly, he was a Senior Assistant Professor at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. It's my pleasure to also welcome the Honorary Chair for today's discussion, David Santoro, President of Pacific Forum USA. He specializes in strategic deterrence, arms control, and non-proliferation. His current interests focus on great power dynamics and US alliances, particularly the role of China in the era of nuclear multipolarity. Participants can put their questions in the chat box, and the team will be taking up the questions. Warm welcome to the webinar. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Let me begin by echoing that we at the Pacific Forum are absolutely delighted to partner with the Center for Public Policy Research for this webinar. I thought I'd begin, by talking a little bit about Pacific Forum, but you already gave a very, very kind introduction. But I guess I'll just say this: that partnering with Indo-Pacific think tanks, and in fact think tanks from beyond the region, is really in Pacific Forum's DNA. You mentioned that we were established in 1975 to engage the region, to discuss issues of mutual interests and sometimes difficult issues, and we've been doing that ever since, in addition to producing our own in-house research. So again, delighted to partner with CPPR today, and we hope to do many more webinars of the kind. So we have seen the US-India partnership strengthen considerably over the past few years, and perhaps even more so over the past few months, with both sides interested in doing a lot more. And really, the scale and the scope of cooperation has been impressive in many areas, including in defense and security, energy, space, various multilateral forums, as well as people-to-people ties. And so our goal today is to explore many of these issues and zoom in particular on the opportunities and challenges for the US-India relationship to address human and climate threats, especially in the maritime domain. And so for that, we have two excellent speakers that were introduced already. So I won't repeat their bios, but we have Mr. Jeffrey Payne and Dr. Manish Turangbam. Welcome to you both. I'll give you in turn the floor for a maximum of 10 minutes, and after which we'll engage in a little bit of a discussion, and I'll also draw on questions from the audience before we close. So Professor Payne, why don't you get us started?
Okay, happy to. David, nice to see you via remotely, but always wonderful to work with the Pacific Forum again. I'm good morning to everyone from Washington, D.C. My name's Jeff Payne, as you know. I work at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies. For Americans, that's too much to say in one mouthful, so we just abbreviate it to NESA. But we are involved in engagement throughout the Indo-Pacific region. We have a more expansive view. We kind of really focus on the Indian Ocean Rim. So Eastern Africa, the areas of West Asia, South Asia, and then into the Indo-Pacific, vis-a-vis Southeast Asian states. I work on a variety of topics pertaining to the maritime domain. And per the conversation today, I think some of the issues that need to be highlighted vis-a-vis this larger topic of cooperation in the maritime domain on issues of furthering security, especially as it relates to enhancing human and climate considerations beyond that hard security definition, is that one, we have to really make sure that the conversation when it comes to the Indo-Pacific as a construct, as a geographic construct, remains rooted to the sea. And I don't think this is as much a problem, say, in India, as it is, say, in the United States. But there is a tendency to take the core of the Indo-Pacific and address it to a niche issue, whether it be something related to a certain type of economic development or a specific type of technological cooperative effort or a technological threat, or even on hard security topics. But really, the way the Indo-Pacific makes sense is through the maritime domain. And because the Indo-Pacific has a commonality in that the lifeblood of the region, even for states that are landlocked, that are not littoral states, is this economic kind of blood flow that is represented by the waters of the region. And these waters are under constant threat, and they're not just from the issues of great power competition. It has to do with the degradation of the biosphere. It has to do with the transformation of global trade and the dangers and hiccups that can result from disruptions to that. And also essentially the mechanisms by which we transform our comprehensive economic interfacing with the maritime domain, whether it be through blue economic projects, whether it be through reimagining how our fishing workforces or our coastal communities are engaged in public policy. And this is something that happily is starting to become part of the conversation, at least in relation to the US-India bilateral relationship. And you're seeing it in a variety of ways, but primarily through private to private sector connectivity, whether it be cooperative efforts on trying to find out more about the degradation of, say, coral reefs, or the collapse of certain species that regional populations survive on, or whether it be in making trade more effective or opening up markets for more actors to get involved. And then from that private to private relationship, the public sectors are getting involved in trying to harness how that they can lower barriers. So how do I see the comprehensive kind of threat portfolio when it comes to these interactive topics? I think the main challenge, and I'll separate it between climate and kind of a political economic mechanism. The climate issue is that we need to understand the need for a comprehensive approach to addressing climate when it comes to the water. State-led mechanisms, I think we have ample evidence to say, are not effective enough. Private sector mechanisms are not effective enough. There's always the whole community is still siloed. It's still isolated. We need to figure out some kind of mechanism or communicative tool to bring more and more of these actors together. There are various ways of doing it. India has pursued a clever way that has been at least tried to be modeled throughout the region, and that is it's still state-led, but state as a convener. of putting all of these factors together and getting everyone from fisheries to corporate interests to coastal communities to the security bureaus and security services themselves all in the same room, and then interfacing that with neighbors. For the US approach, it is being facilitated by technology, with kind of NGOs taking a convener role where they're using satellite imagery and sensor technology to try to show the scale of climate challenges and how to show non-traditional stakeholders in the climate question to show them that long-term, this is in your interest to pay attention and to do something. From the political economic side of it, excuse me, I would highlight the issue of comprehensively the way that maritime commerce keeps us on the razor's edge, and this becomes a security challenge. You don't even necessarily have to look at what's going on today in the Red Sea, or even the blockage of the Suez. You can see in just the backflows of our maritime infrastructure. If ports suffer from some kind of cyber disturbance or hack, or ransomware assault, or just logistical backflows due to our own land-based supply chains, it can have a domino effect throughout the region. And so all of these things, again, we have to break down from our silos. So I kind of would end my brief remarks, opening remarks, is I think a lot of the security challenges, besides the traditional hard security issues, has to do with, we have to open up the number of stakeholders that are involved in these conversations and in formatting either state-led or regional-led policy beyond kind of the established traditional actors. Because in that way, I think we're not only going to find more innovative solutions, but more comprehensively, we'll see some of the threats and raise up their profile that so far have not been highlighted as much as they should have. So David, with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for getting us started. Very, very interesting brief. Let me turn the floor over to Dr. Monish, and then we'll have an exchange. Dr. Monish, over to you.
Thank you, David. First of all, thank you to CPPR and Pacific Forum for the opportunity. And good morning to my co-panelist, Jeff from DC. Well, I mean, I'll try not to repeat what Jeff has excellently sort of like, extrapolated. I'll try to raise some questions about, India-US partnership on, climate mitigation, and also on one of the things that I would highlight in my presentation is sort of connected to trying to partner in order to bring about greener infrastructure and connectivity projects in South Asia, and also in the in the nearer Indian Ocean littorals that that is of core concern to India. Before starting that, let me pick up two vectors, which is geography and history. And why do I do that? One is that even as we talk about the larger Indo-Pacific, I would try to bring the focus closer to home in India in terms of looking at the closer Indian Ocean littorals and also South Asia. In doing that, I think it's important to factor where we are located. What's the geographic like? What's the coastline like? And what are the kind of challenges and opportunities that the kind of coastline brings? Or, even if you look at the Bay of Bengal emerging geoeconomics and the opportunities and challenges that lie there, and the kind of projects, whether it is building of ports, amidst the Chinese sort of activities in this region, how we are trying to partner along with like-minded partners, including countries like Japan. History, because when we, even as we talk about maritime cooperation, we need to remember that maritime, naval cooperation or maritime cooperation is one of the oldest kinds of cooperation between India and US, even before the other tri-services, sort of the other services of the armed forces came in the way that we see it now. many of the factors that we are talking about now, which sort of correlates to climate and greener economy, whether it is talking about sustainable agriculture or whether it is talking about use of space-based applications for for economic activities and commerce, linking it with more enhanced maritime domain awareness. Uh, Despite the larger idea that somehow India and US did not get along very well during the Cold War, my effort has always been to sort of disagree a little bit with that and try to bring out historical anecdotes and instances where there were potential for cooperation in many of these areas. Somehow it sort of did not work out. So, you know, one of the things that we need to understand is, as we talk about partnership, is that US is a global power with global reach and global interests. India is a regional sort of power with regional aspirations closer to the Indian Ocean region. That not really sort of like looking towards the Western Pacific. Uh, so that provides both limitations in terms of how we talk about interdependence and greater interoperability between the two countries. Um, I think one of the things that I would also like to highlight is the idea of the evolving regional architecture in this area. And where do we fit in, um, let's say, a whole of government approach in this effort as India and US try to partner in order to address many of these issues? That it is going to be a multi-department and interagency process as we talk about it, right? We can even extend to a whole of nation approach when we talk about, you know, livelihood of like coastal population and fishermen population and the challenges that comes to fishing activities and all those things. One of the things that I think we need to highlight in this aspect is about building capacity together in the region. I think it's really important. In this, I would like to highlight the kind of things that India and US has been doing through trilateral cooperation, which is that we try to, you know, partner together in terms of building best practices and building capacity in third countries. So trilateral cooperation is a framework that one can work on. Um, one of the one of the instances that we can point out is that of the Quad Infrastructure Fellowship, which is a brilliant capacity building program that has been floated. Um, so as I see it, many of the things that India and US can work on are beginning to work on, which is on connectivity, capacity, and infrastructure. Um, Now, when we talk about connectivity, there are a lot of projects which are trying to build, connect ports, for example, to inland waterways, and then connect it further to continental infrastructure. So that you can see many of that, I think, being taken up in Bangladesh. Um, when we talk of connectivity, capacity, and infrastructure, we are really talking of increasing prosperity. These are not just about building roads or building ports. They are all meant for greater prosperity in the region, as India proposes and propagates security and cooperation for all in the region. Connectivity, capacity, infrastructure, this comes from peace and stability. How do you ensure peace and stability? And peace and stability comes from durable, effective, resilient partnerships in the region. So this connection between connectivity, capacity, infrastructure leading to prosperity, and the requirement of peace and stability, which is brought about by durable, effective, resilient partnership, is something that I would like to highlight for further discussion. One of the things that the last but thing that I want to bring in is the idea of linking regional stability to ecological stability. I think that's really important when we talk about mitigating climate change effects. How do we link conceptually as well as in practice How do we link regional stability to ecological stability? How do you make it a political imperative and amplify the economic returns from that? I think that's really important. Unless we amplify the economic returns from any of these initiatives, they are not going to be much sustainable. And at the end, I would like to point out that what we really need to do as we talk about human-centric and climate change mitigation partnerships is amplifying the incentives of cooperation. How do we amplify the incentives of cooperation? And also, how do we amplify the consequences of non-cooperation? And I think at the end, I would like to end my presentation by just highlighting the importance of emerging technologies in this area. The idea of importance of having an industry-led, consensus-based, multi-stakeholder approach to developing technology standards. And there are a whole lot of examples. You can talk about this digital public infrastructure. You can talk about securing critical infrastructure. You can talk about space-based technologies in sync with their responsibility in increasing even maritime domain awareness. So at the end, I would like to end by saying that as we develop this new template for security, which is human-centric, I think one of the most important facets of this, unlike hard security affairs, is the centrality of information sharing. How important it is for partners to share information in this kind of a new template of security. So I would like, with that, I would like to end my presentation and open to discussion.
Thank you very much. Two great briefs to get us started. I guess I've got several points and questions, but one thing that I thought I'd begin with is the question of comprehensiveness, which both of you actually mentioned, the need for a whole of government approach when we talk about cooperation. And I'm just wondering if this is actually the best approach given some of the challenges that the two countries have had. Is that too ambitious, or is this really where we need to go? Can we actually get there? Can we implement a comprehensive approach to build a partnership that is effective? Or should we, or alternatively, are we at a point where we should actually essentially cooperate on issues that are accessible? Should we just focus on cooperating where we can? That's one question. The second question that I'll pose to you as well is the one on capacity, and I think both of you mentioned that. I wonder about the type of focus that we should give capacity building efforts. I think the linkage, the question on how we link regional stability to ecological stability and how we build capacity with that in mind is an interesting one. And I think the way I would answer that, but I'd be curious what you think, is that instead of thinking about the problems we need to respond to, maybe we should focus on building a partnership to figure out what it is that we want to do. And that's a little bit of a different approach, but I think that would help actually build a better partnership. And so I'd be curious what you think about this. So if you can answer your own question basically on how we can do this better. So maybe we'll start with Monish and then Jeff. We'll go in reverse order.
All right. I'll start from the last question, which is about capacity building. The focus of it, the question about regional stability to ecological stability. One of the things that I've been researching on and have been thinking about lately and trying to bring it to my writing is to think about, I know that Afghanistan is still, it's not, Afghanistan is still an issue for many of the regional countries. But as someone who studies US foreign policy, I tend to think of what is going to be US focus, or what is going to be US South Asia policy after 20 years of Afghanistan. And many researchers who have been studying the region, me including, uh, we tend to think that a post-Afghanistan U.S. South Asia policy maybe it's beginning to take shape, and one of the highlighting factors of that perhaps is on greater partnership in capacity building. Of course, the U.S. Government has its own program of capacity building as well as capability and infrastructure building. You can see that in Sri Lanka, the US, one of the US government agencies has already invested in port development in Sri Lanka. You can see that in Bangladesh. Many of this were outlined, I think, in the last Indian Ocean Conference where US government representatives had attended in Dhaka. You can, not in the maritime sense, but at least in South Asia, in the Himalayan region, you can see that happening in Nepal with MCC, the Millennium Corporation. So I think there is a certain sort of like evolving new kind of South Asia policy, and also including the Indian Ocean littorals in South Asia, as far as US is concerned. I think the point for India-US partnership, from our point of view, is India has its own experience, had with both ups and downs of how it goes forward in terms of dealing with its immediate littoral neighbors. Maldives is still a concern in the immediate sense, because of political changes and other things. So I think this is one of the areas where a lot of focus needs to be shifted in terms of, you can't minus the China factor, but there is more to be done in the IOR, and there's more to be done in South Asia as far as India-US partnership is concerned. And a lot can be done through capacity building, and a lot can be done through partnership and capability building. So I tend to see it in that sense, that what is the US focus after 20 years of Afghanistan in South Asia? The second question, the first actually, about comprehensiveness. I think, a government, given the kind of issues that we are talking about, right? Whether it is about partnership in mitigating climate change, or whether it's about handling some of the non-state security threats in the high seas, and whether it's about constabulary practices in the EEZs, so I think there is already a multi-agency factor here, right? You have a naval to naval cooperation, you have a coast guard to coast guard cooperation, and then when you're talking about finance, you're talking about like port development, when you're talking about infrastructure building and many of these things, we are already going towards a whole of, if not whole of government, definitely a multi-agency and a multi-department approach. I don't see any two ways about it. Maybe I agree with you in the sense that how do we look at the feasibility of it, that instead of bringing in and then aiming too high, how do we look and focus at certain areas? But the nature of the threats that we are talking about here, the nature of the concerns that we are talking about here, I don't think there is no two way about it, but to look at it as a multi-department and a multi-agency issue, and then going towards a whole of government and a whole of government approach.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, first off, two excellent questions. I don't think I had enough caffeine to rise completely to the challenge, but I will start with your first question, and essentially from the U.S. point of view. I think one of the changes that has slowly occurred over I don't know if it's directly correlated to the rise of the Indo-Pacific as a core foreign policy construct, but something that the world needs to become accustomed to, and it's taken a long time for the U.S. internally itself to come accustomed to it, is that the U.S. definition of capacity building is changing. Honestly, especially in the U.S. Department of Defense, capacity building usually traditionally meant stuff. We're going to give you stuff, equipment. We're going to give you vessels. We're going to give you, radar facilities. We're going to give you these things without necessarily the training or the secondary, tertiary infrastructure to sustain them. And then it becomes maybe not effective, maybe never used, maybe not the right set of tools for the problem sets that the partner we're giving them to or providing them to has. The U.S. has taken a while to learn some of those lessons, but they are learning them. And the kind of reimagining of capacity building is really about capability enhancement. Training, exercises, actual hands-on experience, building networks of people who are facing the similar challenge set. The U.S., because it is a global actor, can say, hey, listen, if you're Sri Lanka and you're facing this following problem, you actually may have more in common with the country, say, in the Caribbean than you do necessarily with all of your South Asian neighbors. So we can, well, that is becoming more of the capacity building question. So the days of stuff are gone. Stuff is still provided, but it's not the answer, the default answer of the U.S. So as a result of that, going to Manish's great point about MDA, I'm kind of the proselytizer in the United States for all MDA. MDA, unfortunately, is still tied to a security construct. I think it's really, honestly, in my opinion, a political tool. It's a political idea. It's a way for us to take things that emerge from the security conversations, but get them on the political dialogues that occur in our policy circles around the world. MDA is kind of a political mechanism for hacking the conversations about the water. People in Delhi, people in Washington, people in Brussels, people in Beijing, for that matter, they know very little about what's actually happening at sea. And so to get the people who do know what's happening to those individuals is not a direct line. It's not even an indirect direct line. It is this whole maze of things you have to do. So MDA is a way of raising the kind of spotlight on some of the challenges. So in that respect, to get to you, should we have a comprehensive India-US kind of partnership or a targeted one? I think the answer is I don't know yet. And I think that's actually a good thing, because right now there's sort of a race. It's a mess. Everything that's going on in the maritime domain is a mess right now in the Indo-Pacific. People are constantly recycling other efforts. India has stood up its fusion center. It's successful. Someone else says, well, I want a fusion center. And then it becomes this trend. Someone else tried X. That worked. I'm going to do X. Everyone keeps reinventing the wheel. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because it brings more and more eyes and more attention on the maritime domain. Yes, there will be some waste of effort and time and even money, but increasingly those things will streamline as we get an approach that where rubber meets road, so to speak, becomes more viable, and there'll become a larger kind of plenary of people involved in it. So I think we'll get to targeted efforts, but I think right now we're in this messy phase where we're trying to navigate all of this. As for your second question, I think China, to a degree, is helping us facilitate a precise plan. I think the conversation in Delhi, and I think definitely the conversation in the United States, is that the narrative is that China's eating our lunch. China's better at this than we are. China's doing this better and quicker than we are. Because we don't see the other side of the coin. We don't see the more comprehensive kind of impact. We don't see their own weaknesses in their system. We only highlight our own weaknesses for our own audiences. There is a lot of wins that are starting coming out of the partnership between the United States and India, as well as between India and Japan, India and France, the US and the Philippines. There's all this networking that is starting to occur, focused on the maritime domain, that is showing countries who may be wondering what the future of maritime security looks like, that yes, China can give you everything you need, but you're tied to them. It's a one vendor option. And once you're in that system, you're locked into it. The other side of the coin, the coin that the side that India and US represent, is messy, but there's more options. The price points vary. The capabilities can be tailor-made. Everything shows a lot of momentum if you pay close enough attention. The narratives aren't there. So I think part of me answering your question, David, is to say that I think part of the answer is that India and US suffer from a similar problem of strategic communications. We're not fantastic at it. And we need to get far better about talking about how all of this momentum matches to the Indo-Pacific construct and how that further really on the ground helps make the waters of the Indo-Pacific secure, not from China, but for fishermen, for commercial sailors, for port authorities, and so forth.
To build on that, or great answers to you both, but to build on that a little bit, you know, despite all this, I think we will have to accept a degree of messiness just because you have two actors in this case, maybe more if you include others, and just the nature of the government means more messiness as well. We can get better at strategic communication, but even if we do, I think it will still be messy, and you know, it will come. I think this is just simply something that we need to accept. Building on this, let me ask one more question, and then I'll turn to questions from the audience. Do you see addressing non-traditional, so-called non-traditional security threats, you know, the human and climate threats, are as a good first step towards addressing more difficult, harder security issues? And I guess what I'm asking is this how we build the partnership, which, as was mentioned, is messy? Is this a good route to take? Should we take it, or should we address other issues as well right now?
I'll jump in first, Monish, if you don't care. David, again, a great question. I don't know if it is the way, but it is a way. And I think it's a way for say, taking India, the United States as an example of two democratic states where it does make sense. And you can narrow it down even further and take the case of IUU fishing. So illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Very niche issue that most people throughout India and the United States have no idea anything about the scale and the absolute degradation that fishing is doing to our oceans and seas. But this weird patchwork of NGOs and state actors and technological firms, fishing companies, legitimate ones, as well as, you know, supply chains who want to make sure that they're not going to get fines or lose their supply because they're not following things closely enough. I've kind of put together this patchwork where it's not stopping the problem, but it's making actors who do it, it's making their lives far harder. The commercial kind of opportunities that are happening in low Earth orbit with the kind of explosion of interest there is making tracking vessels that are up to no good easier to do. And then there are various ways you can approach it, from either tracking where the ship goes to highlight their supply chain, or if they're doing a ship-to-ship transfer, how they commonly do that, so people get more aware of it, to actual implementation that state actors can do, whether it be through interdiction, where you can coordinate among coast guards or maritime constabularies, where they can more easily, like, this vessel's about to head into your waters, we have line of sight, we have an agreement where if they're wanted in our waters, you can then arrest them. This is happening more commonly. But also, even if you don't have that power, there are ways where you can name and shame. This is something that the Filipino Coast Guard is doing very, very, very well, where their fishermen or the Coast Guard may not be able to interdict, but they know that illegal fishing is happening, and they're providing satellite phones, or they're setting up ways to instantaneously communicate it. Instead of sending it into some government ministry where it has to go through all the process, it goes immediately to social media. And then the world sees that this vessel tied to this corporate interest that is going to this port in China or in Spain or in wherever is involved in illegal fishing, and they've been illegally fishing Filipino waters or Indonesian waters or Bangladeshi waters or Indian waters. And it's become a problem. China 10 years ago said they didn't engage in illegal fishing. Now they say, yeah, we do, but everybody does. Well, for China, that's a pretty big change in kind of the way that they're admitting to the problem. And then this leads to actual real hard security dynamics, because it's building a mechanism by which we're seeing the actual real benefits of real-time communication, not this silo to silo. The principals have to talk and then the orders filter down. That still happens, and that's still necessary for the strategy. But in terms of the tactical moves that are happening on the ground or at sea, we're seeing that, yeah, we can lessen up some of this. And this is true in the India-US relationship, where it's not so much the ties between the leaders that are fantastic. That has been the case for a good decade. But the amount of entanglements among the ministries and the departments, among even private interests, is exploding. And this sharing of information does have real tangible tools where you can translate the lessons, say, from IUU fishing to talking about things like port investment, or to even talk more specifically about certain issues tied to China's long-term security interests throughout the Indian Ocean region. Because we all know that, you know, Djibouti and their position in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden is not going to be their only priority in the long
run. Yeah. So, you know, just to pick up from what Jeb spoke about, this deep network of institutional linkages that has been built up between India and the United States. I think that's something which is at the very center of this partnership. That it's not just at the political leadership. What this partnership has, I think, managed to do in the last 2 decades or so is to build this network of linkages. I mean, you know, we can talk about any sector on this. To talk about the maritime sector as well, the kind of institutional linkages that have been built between the 2 countries, and also the exploding sort of networking that is going to happen, state aided and otherwise, between the non-state, the private sector is also, I think, it's exponential in some ways. To come back to the either or question that you started with, I think, I don't see any way of like prioritizing one over the other, right? Of course, I mean, in most of the discussions, we often speak about this the notion about great power rivalry, and all those tend to put it as a higher threat level security that has to be dealt in a very different way. The complexity of your question is to be found, I think, in the optics and the narratives that surround groups like the Quad, for instance, right? Just looking at the joint statement that come out of the Quad, and the kind of optics that the Quad wants to bring off, that whether it's something that's born out of great power rivalry, is it something that is driven by great power rivalry, or is it something that comes out of what we are talking about, which is transnational threats? We're talking about human-centric, and talking about, for example, HADR activities and the very issue of first responders to HADR activities. If you remember, the Quad itself has a genesis, for example, in the Indian Ocean tsunami, right? And the 4 partners that came because we were geographically located in such a way, and we had the capability and the experience to respond to that kind of a human-centric problem, a disaster. So I think this is something that is going to happen simultaneously. There's no way we can sort of ignore the great power rivalry and the hardcore security part of it. For instance, and just to give an example, right? One of the Bush era initiatives that started was PSI, Proliferation Security Initiative. India didn't sign on to it, but there were on practice there, we were practically doing the same thing. Indians and Americans were cooperating in joint interdiction practices and training programs. So we were more or less doing the same thing, which is to interdict ships, check containers on the high seas, but we didn't sign up to the PSI, to the Proliferation Security Initiative. So there are many constraints that could be brought by hard power security issues, but it's a way of, as I think Jeff rightly pointed out, not the way, but a way of trying to find habits of cooperation among like-minded partners in order to deal with many of these issues, related to maritime security, related to marine ecology, related to illegal fishing. I think there's no way of prioritizing one over the other.
Right, thank you both. Because time is flying by, let me just move on to the questions from the audience. I'll take two. One is about broader cooperation, so cooperation between the United States and India, but also others, including the Quad or a third actor. And the question is if the specific instances or models that you could highlight of successful efforts of cooperation that could serve as a blueprint for future engagement, either in the domain in question or other domains. So if you had to pick maybe, let's say, 2 or 3 collaborative efforts that worked, which one would you pick? That's the first question. The second question is about the role that the US Indo-Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM, could play in strengthening India's theater command system and larger Indian Ocean region. So I guess that one is probably more a question to Jeff, although Manish, feel free to jump in as well. So let me put that on the table. Did you maybe Jeff go first?
Yeah.
Just work.
Okay, I'll try to go with the question related to Indo-PACOM. It's long been a refrain by India, and I understand their perspective from India, that the Indian Ocean region is broken among 3 U.S. combatant commands: U.S. CENTCOM, U.S. AFRICOM, and then U.S. Indo-PACOM. And that has been a source of frustration. I've always jokingly told my Indian colleagues it's actually a bounty for India, because you have 3 different commands you can do different forms of engagement with. But Indo-PACOM, how it can assist India in its structuring, I think a lot of it is it's partially really about the kind of interwoven connectivity between both the Indian military and the US military, where we're learning from each other. I think the main thing that Indo-PACOM can teach, how India structures this military and how it essentially engages in the protection of India itself, is understanding that for the US, the idea of public-private partnerships is not it's not a buzzword. It is really kind of becoming a cornerstone of the US idea of how we conceptualize defense. That the private sector is becoming very much an emphasis, given the technological age we're living in. The Defense Innovation Unit, which started as kind of a very small office to help with tying into the private sector, is now a direct reporting unit to the United States Secretary of Defense. Inside the Department of Defense, that's a very big deal. To go from a very small experimental thing to a direct reporting unit shows that. So when we work with India about our public-private partnerships, often India is a little hesitant about that, because how is the private sector kind of your lead on this? Well, because in a lot of ways, the private sector is doing a better job on some certain things that the US military needs. And then this also can help really establish a strong kind of base point or superstructure for larger, more complicated forms of collaboration and cooperation. So India has the same capability, and that's something that Indo-PACOM specifically has embraced. Admiral Aquilino and I know Admiral Paparo both embrace that kind of concept. So that is something I think the Indian military structure can learn some lessons from the United States, hard-learned lessons on our side. As for the first question, honestly, I will let Monish kind of address that more directly. But I hope that addresses some of the aspects about how Indo-PACOM, what lesson I see Indo-PACOM can assist with.
Absolutely, very, very useful.
Yeah, right. I'll pick up the Indo-PACOM and then go to the other one. Nothing to add to what Jeb pointed out. Excellent points. I think there is the real-time implication of the Indo-PACOM naming of the Indo-PACOM. I think it's still playing out, and I think definitely agree with what Jeb pointed about. Coming off the private sector, and that's an exciting thing. What's happening? I think for India, it's sort of new in the sense that how do we sort of like align private sector and public sector? One of the interesting examples I think that is going to show up in the coming years definitely is our startups in the space technology sector. I think India is doing really well in that sector, and there's a lot of alignment happening with the US sector as well. ISRO and NASA has been working on for a very long time in the civilian sector, but there is now a certain movement, at least an initiative, to cooperate also on the national security aspects and the defense aspects. And I think that's an exciting area, given the new startups which are operating or coming up in India, and also the kind of leeway that is being provided through the Made in India campaign to a number of private sector companies in India to deal at least in componential elements of the defense sector, if not the strategic technologies part of it. I think to add to that, I think Indo-PACOM is going to become really interesting in terms of how India absorbs the concept and the practice of integrated deterrence that is sort of being debated in the United States right now. And I believe that the deployment of US power in the maritime and otherwise is going through a certain kind of shift in the Indo-Pacific, in the sense that unlike in the Cold War, US has had to learn how to deal with more independent powers and how to transfer technology to them without they being allies. Because I think India is a very test case example of that, how to do TOT with a country like India, which refuses to sign up on an alliance stuff, get on the board, with every time, commentators in Washington, D.C. calling out India's bad. So I think, that's something which is playing out, how America deals with a country like India, how India deals with a country like America. And coming, I'll pull that into the first question, which is about, the best case practice, something like that. If we were to talk about hard security issues as well, I think the best test is the defense cooperation. That is where I think much of the alignment has happened and much of the initiatives have been taken by the government. So I see a lot of things happening in the defense sector over the last 15, 16 years or so. When I started studying US foreign policy way back in 2007, I would have never expected way back that the volume and the quality and the comprehensiveness of the defense cooperation would be what I'm seeing now. I would have never imagined that. But if we are talking about the known hard security issues which we are talking now, I think despite the challenges, one of the continuity that I've found in the green energy cooperation is something that we need to focus on. this is not new because the green energy cooperation sector has been there as a part of India-US partnership since the Bush era. In a different format, of course. It has evolved to a large extent to include a lot of things. In India, there are misalignment in terms of how in India we look at consumption of energy and development, and how is it viewed in the Western countries. That is there, but I feel that given the future consequence of it and the history behind it, India-US partnership on green energy and green economy is something that we need to sort of tap on. I believe that the kind of interoperability that Indian forces and American forces have developed, not only on hard security measures, but on IKDR activities with the signing of LSA, one of the foundational agreements. I think that's also one area which will have a lot of consequence in how we deal with many of these issues that we are talking about today, which is human-centric and in nature. And one of the third area that I would like to really highlight is to what extent we can extend our bilateral partnership with other like-minded partners, because that's going to be really important when we look at dealing with some of the challenges that China has posed through BRI in the Indian Ocean littorals and in South Asia. Japan is a very good example. Japan has the experience and the kind of investment that it has continuously done in the Bay of Bengal area. Japan has been responsible for building one of the deep sea ports in Bangladesh, the Matarbari port. So I think that is one area for future consequence that I am really interested in, as to what extent this bilateral relationship can be extended to include like-minded partners in many of these pursuits that we are talking about.
Thank you, Monish. One point I'll make is that, yes, when it comes to dealing with so-called strategically autonomous countries, the United States has some homework to do. And that requires a very sort of deep mindset change. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it certainly requires a change in the way we think. Of course, we're coming towards the end of the webinar already. I had many other questions, including about whether or not we're exercising sufficiently when it comes to these issues, whether bilaterally and with others. And Manish, I'm glad you brought that up at the end. I think this is probably should be the subject for a future webinar. But with that, let me thank you both for great remarks and a very engaging conversation. And let me pass on the floor back to Anisri.
Thank you, David, for moderating a very insightful discussion. And thank you, Jeff and Dr. Manish, for your insights. So I think the discussion has very well captured the various geopolitical, conventional and non-conventional security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. And it also highlighted the prospects for cooperation between Washington and New Delhi in the bilateral space as well as multilateral space. So it was an honor to host you all today, and it was a great joy to partner with the Pacific Forum. And we hope to continue the cooperation in the future and have more conversations. Thank you all the participants for logging in, listening so intently, and for your questions. We look forward to more fruitful engagement with you all through our webinars and conferences. Please follow our website and social media for more engagements and further updates. So with this, I would like to formally close today's proceedings. Wishing you all a lovely day ahead. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.